name's Bina Jengdo with TCM Review Seminars. For the past decade, I've helped thousands of students pass their board exams on the first try. And my goal is to make sure everyone passes their board exams so that we have you out and licensed and working and growing the profession. So, are you interested in that? Let me give you a little sample of how I teach. Last week, I got a question from Sandra B, and Sandra wanted me to explain the concept of true heat, false cold, versus true cold, false heat. These two patterns get really tricky on case studies because you have opposing symptoms of cold and heat. And that's confusing for students, understandably so, right? In both these patterns, the true pathogen is pushing the false pathogen to the surface. And so you have these opposing symptoms of heat and cold. First, let's clarify the name of the patterns. Okay, so false cold is not the same as empty cold, and that can lead to some confusion. Empty cold is what? You guys know this. That's right, yang deficiency. And false cold is a pattern that makes you think that there is cold in this case study, but it's not. That's why it's termed false cold. So what's happening in the pattern of true heat, false cold is that there's excess heat trapped in the interior of the body. And when you have that heat obstruction in the body, it prevents the free flow of qi and yang and blood. Remember, it's qi and yang that moves blood. And it's the blood that brings the qi and yang to different areas of the body, especially that yang. It provides the warmth to the area. So remember that true heat, false cold, is a pattern of excess heat that's trapped in the interior, and that prevents the free flow of qi, yang, and blood to the exterior and the extremities of the body, making it look like there are cold symptoms. In the same way, false heat is not empty heat. What is empty heat? You know this. That's right, yin deficiency. So false heat is a pattern that makes you think that there's heat present, but there's not. What is happening is that there's cold in the center of the body, and this is moving the qi and the yang and the blood to the exterior and giving the impression that there's heat in the body, but it's not really, right? It's just displaced yang. The yang needs to be in the interior, but it's on the exterior. And this is actually a really critical condition. I'll explain that later on, but for now, you just want to know that this is not excess cold. Now, I want to give you 3 essential keys that will help you differentiate these symptoms on any case. There's a couple of factors that you want to consider. So first of all, the true pathogen is in the center of the body. And this helps to differentiate from other mixed patterns of cold and heat, like cold above, heat below, or heat above, cold below, or like a wind heat on the exterior with a cold deficiency on the interior. These are all different. This really comes down to looking at the location. You're going to see the majority of the true pathogen on the interior, on the trunk of the body. Second of all, you want to look at the color of the urine. You want to look at the bowel movements. You want to look at the covering, and you want to look at the tongue as well. And these 4 symptoms will show you what's really going on in the body. And then last of all, you want to look at the temperature on the limbs versus the trunk. Now let's look at the symptoms for each pattern. First, let's look at true heat versus false cold. This tends to be easier to identify than true cold, false heat. So with this one, we have a dark face, bright eyes with spirit, red, dry lips. So we're already seeing the heat. We see it in the lips. Irritability, which is a sign of heat, or you see it in qi stagnation as well, but it is a symbol or a symptom of heat. You have a strong body. There's our excess. The tongue body color is red and dry. Remember I said, if you look for the tongue and look what's happening on the tongue. That will tell you what's really happening in the case. The breathing is noisy. The voice is loud. That tells us that there's excess. Not necessarily heat, but we know that there's excess. There's thirst with desire to drink cold fluids, scanty dark urine, constipation, burning sensation in the anus. So here we have, again, our urine, right? Dark urine. What's happening with the bowel movements? Constipation. There's our heat. What's the thirst? Drink cold fluids and burning sensation in the anus. Here the pulse is full and deep. Now with pulse changes so quickly. It changes when you walk up the stairs. It changes if you're nervous. So a pulse isn't going to help you necessarily. So we're going to ignore that. And then we have limbs that are cold, and then the chest is hot. So when we look at this case, limbs are cold. There's our false cold. In this one, and like I said, this is an easier pattern to identify. There really aren't a lot of cold symptoms. The limbs are cold, everything else shows heat. Do you guys recognize this pattern? Do you maybe have an inkling? Do you remember another pattern that looks this way? How about Yang-Ming organ heat? Doesn't this pattern look like Yang-Ming organ heat? It kind of does, doesn't it? Or large intestine heat obstruction. Now, in this case, it's not identical to the Zongfu pattern of large intestine heat obstruction, and it's not quite identical to the Yang-Ming organ heat, but there are definitely similarities that are happening here. The key one being constipation and heat buildup in the interior, leading to limbs that are cold. Okay, now let's look at true cold and false heat. Here we have red cheeks, but the red color is like powder. So generally when you see red cheeks, you think of yin deficiency, that's right. But here, that red color is like powder and the rest of the face is white. This is not yin deficiency. This is key for true cold, false heat. The next set of symptoms, we have irritability. There's a little bit of heat there. We have listlessness. Usually when someone has heat in them, there'll be a lot of restlessness. You don't have that here. Okay, you have listlessness. So that's always a symptom of deficiency. Desire to lie with the body curled up. Again, you have deficiency. Pale, wet tongue. Again, that's deficiency cold, right? The breathing is quiet and there's a low voice. So again, we're seeing deficiency. And here we have thirst but no desire to drink or desire to drink warm fluids. Body feels hot, but he or she likes to be covered. So again, we have this like back and forth of cold symptoms, heat symptoms, cold symptoms, heat symptoms. This one is a lot more difficult for students on exams. Here there's a sore throat, but without redness or swelling. And then there's also pale urine. The pulse is rapid and floating and big but empty. Now, let's not worry about the pulse. What were the things I told you to look at? The thirst, right? And here, the desire to drink warm fluids. But we do have this little bit here that says thirst, but no desire to drink. So what syndrome is that? When you see thirst, but no desire to drink, that tells you damp heat, doesn't it? And while we have heat symptoms here, we don't have damp symptoms. We don't have distension. We don't have heaviness. We don't have mucus in the urine. We don't have diarrhea with a foul odor or with burning sensation, etc. So this is definitely not damp heat. Don't let that one symptom confuse you. This is how it manifests with true heat, false cold. We also want to look at the coverings, and this person likes to be covered. So the body feels hot, but they like to be covered. So it's very different. It's the urine, which is pale, that you look at, and it's also the tongue, which is pale, wet tongue coat. So all of these things tell you that there's true cold inside. So the cause of true cold false heat is severe yang deficiency, to the point where yin and yang are starting to separate. Now let's back up for a minute. At the beginning, I said that false cold is not yang deficiency. That's right, but this pattern is true cold, and the true cold here is yang deficiency. The false heat here is what remains of the yang in the body that floats upwards and out as yin and yang separate. If you think about this as a formula, sini tang, or frigid extremity decoction, which is specifically for yang collapse. And in this pattern, this is yang collapsing. That's what we see. But notice that the key symptom students associate with yang collapse is missing. What is that? Yeah, the oily sweat isn't here, and that's perfectly okay. These two patterns come from the theory of diagnosis based on 8 principles, whereas when we think of like oily sweat as a symptom of yang collapse, this comes from the theory of diagnosis based on qi, blood, and body fluids. So we're dealing with 2 totally different diagnostic theories, and that's why they're similar, but they're not the same. So don't let this small detail confuse you. This is true cold, false heat, which is yang collapsing due to severe yang deficiency. And the heat that you see is that remnants of the yang floating up and out to the exterior of the body. Okay, I'm going to end here and let that last part sink in. So before we go, I have a few questions I'd like to ask you. Are you a third-year student? Did you recently graduate from acupuncture college, or are you struggling to pass your board exams? Well, I have your solution. Take my review classes. I've helped thousands, literally thousands of students since I started over a decade ago to pass their board exams on the first try. If you follow my system, I can guarantee that you pass. If you'd like to find out more about my courses, if you're a US student, tcmreview.com. Canadian students, tcmreview.ca. The links are below. I also have a Facebook page and an Instagram account as well. So I look forward to seeing you in my classes. Until the next time.